Hello, everybody. We are starting our histology unit today. Histology is the study of tissues. And you might recall from way at the beginning of the year when we did that levels of organization activity that a tissue is a group or mass of similar cells working together to perform common functions. There are four major categories of tissues. Today, our focus is going to be mostly on epithelial tissue. Epi means outer, so this makes up the outer surfaces of not only your body, so your skin is epithelial tissue, or a lot of epithelial tissue, and also the outer coverings of your organs. Next, we have connective tissue. Connective tissue connects things together. Muscle tissue helps you move, and nervous tissue, those are your nerve cells that allow for communication throughout the body. And if you think about that level of organization activity, multiple tissues make an organ. And so in any one organ, you'll have all these different tissue types working together in order to form that organ. So we are going to start with epithelial tissue. So here are just some diagrams of epithelial tissues. They'll make up the outer surface of your body in your skin, but they will also line your insides, all the hollow places inside, like your esophagus and your windpipe, and any of the glands, any of the little tubes in your organs that will secrete things, your intestines. So all of these hollow openings are going to be lined with epithelial tissue. So epithelial tissue covers all body surfaces, both inside and out. It is the main glandular tissue, which makes up your glands. So your sweat glands, your salivary glands, all the glands in your pancreas and in your liver have epithelial tissue. One thing that is common among all of the different epithelial tissues that we're going to talk about is that they have a layer underneath called the basement membrane. So if you look at this very simple diagram of epithelial tissue, these cubes here that you see on stacked on top of one another, these are epithelial cells, and they are sitting on this red basement membrane. What that basement membrane does is lets this tissue stick to another tissue below it. So in this case, we have connective tissue. So if we were building an organ with these different tissue types, we'd have epithelial on the outer surface, then a basement membrane, and then some sort of connective tissue that could be connecting this epithelial tissue to some muscles or maybe some bones or something, just attaching this tissue to other tissues. That's why that basement membrane is there. Epithelial tissue usually does not have any vascular tissue, meaning that there aren't a whole lot of blood vessels in epithelial tissue. They don't have a blood supply. And this is why if you were just to very lightly scratch your skin, you don't start bleeding. How these cells get their nutrients is they get their nutrients from blood vessels found in connective tissues. Another characteristic is these cells reproduce rapidly. This is because they are on the outer surface, so these cells receive an onslaught of different toxins and different things that could damage them. And so as a result, they need to heal pretty quickly. And so these cells, they divide by mitosis very rapidly in order to create rapid healing. And sometimes scarring. We'll talk about scars when we get to our unit on the skin. These cells are tightly packed together, and because they are exposed to so many environmental toxins and hazards that these cells in particular are very prone to cancer. And they also already reproduce rapidly. Cancer is uncontrolled cell growth. So we have a group of cells that are reproducing very quickly that are exposed to all sorts of toxins and damage over and over. They could become cancerous. So 90% of cancers are epithelial tissue cancers. The main functions of epithelial tissue are protection. So they protect the outer surface of your body. They protect your organs. Secretion. So they'll produce things like hormones or saliva or sweat and will secrete it. They'll produce it. Absorption. They'll absorb nutrients, like in your small intestine and in your lungs. They'll absorb oxygen. And then excretion. So they'll get rid of wastes. How we classify epithelial tissues is based on two things. First, the shape of the cells, and then the number of layers of the cells. This is how we name epithelial tissues. Naming is based on the description. So if a tissue is classified as simple, cells are arranged in a single layer. If it's stratified, that means multiple layers. So simple, one layer, stratified, multiple layers. We also name them based on the shape of the cells. So squamous is flat, or you can think of squamous squashed. These are very flat, thin cells. Cuboidal sounds like cube, so these are square-shaped cells. And then finally, we have columnar cells. These have a column or a rectangle shape. These are longer cells. And so how we classify tissues is based on the number of layers and the shape. So you can have a tissue that is simple squamous, a single layer of flat cells, or you could have stratified squamous, multiple layers of flat cells. You could have stratified columnar, which are multiple layers of column-shaped cells. And each form has different functions. So we will begin with simple squamous tissue. The form is a single layer of flat and thin cells. And their function is for diffusion and filtration. And we find these in the air sacs or the alveoli in the lungs, and also capillaries, or tiny blood vessels. And so if you look at this picture, only as little gray cells that you see lining the air sac and lining the capillary, that is simple squamous epithelium. And these are flat and thin, so that way oxygen can diffuse from the air sac into the blood rapidly, and so carbon dioxide can diffuse out of the blood and into the air sac to be exhaled rapidly. Next, we have simple cuboidal. These are a single layer of cube-shaped cells, and their main function is for secretion and absorption. So these are found in the kidneys and some of the ducts and coverings of the ovaries. Next, we have simple columnar cells. These form a single layer of elongated cells. So we see here they're tall and skinny, and we only have one layer. Sometimes these can have scattered goblet cells that secrete mucus. So here is a picture of a goblet cell. They have these big pockets that are filled with mucus. And so different linings that need to be kept moist with that mucus have a lot of goblet cells in that epithelial tissue. They can also have microvilli to increase surface area. If you remember from that cell structure and function activity that we did not too long ago, microvilli are at the top of the cells here. So this is the small intestine. And here is the epithelial lining of the small intestine. We're going to zoom in on those cells. We have our simple columnar cells. And at the top, we can see all these little finger-like projections coming off of the cell that help to increase surface area. Their function is mainly for secretion, like secretion of mucus, and absorption. So in your small intestine, these cells will absorb the nutrients from your food. These are found in your digestive tract and in the uterus. Next, we have stratified squamous. This is a multiple layer of flat cells, and these mainly function in protection. They are found on your skin and lining the inside of body cavities. So, for example, your mouth will have a lot of stratified squamous cells. And the one thing I want to point out with stratified tissues is that when you try to identify the shape of the cells, you always want to look at the uppermost layers. You can see that at the top, they're really flat, and at the bottom, they're more cuboidal. But we look at the uppermost layers in order to figure out the name. There is also such a thing as stratified cuboidal and stratified columnar, but for our purposes, we are not going to cover those tissues. But there are two more tissues that we need to discuss, and these do not follow those nice, neat naming rules. The first is pseudostratified columnar. These cells, they appear stratified because they have such awkward shapes, but they are actually a single layer because all of the cells are attached to the basement membrane. If you look at this diagram here, you can see every single cell makes contact with that basement membrane. So it really is just one layer. But the nuclei are all over the place. So it's hard to tell whether this is one layer or another. These cells, they can have cilia, which are the little hairs that could be on the top that help sweep and move things around in the body. And they can also have those goblet cells that secrete mucus. Their job is for secretion and cilia-aided movement, and these are found in the air passages, so your trachea and your bronchi, and in the tubes of the reproductive system. Next, we have transitional epithelium. This appears stratified when you first look at it, but it is able to stretch into a single layer. And this is useful because it blocks diffusion, so no leaking, and it is found in the urinary bladder. So here's a picture of what it looks like under the microscope. Here, all that transitional epithelium is relaxed. It looks stratified, but as this bladder fills with urine, those can stretch to form a single layer of cells. Lastly, we have glandular epithelium. Glandular epithelium can be any shape, but the one thing that all glandular epithelium has in common is that these cells are specialized to secrete stuff and they make up glands. So you can have exocrine glands that secrete stuff outside your body, such as your salivary glands and your sweat glands, or you have endocrine glands inside your body that secrete hormones. So here's one example of glandular epithelium. You can see that it's a pseudostratified shape. It's got a single layer of cells. It's got goblet cells. It's got those cilia. But because it uses those goblet cells to secrete stuff, it is considered to be glandular epithelium. For your exit ticket, I would like you to identify these pictures of different tissues going from top to bottom, from left to right. So top to bottom and left to right.